40 years and 2 days. That's how long it's been since our next guest launched into space and the history books. October 5th, 1984, Marc Garneau became the first Canadian astronaut to head into space. Look, there you are. 2.5 decades later, he made history again as the first astronaut to become a member of Parliament. And between those professional adventures, he has also served as the president of the Canadian Space Agency. Among other things, his public-facing accomplishments are well documented. But now, Garneau is letting readers into a bit of his personal life with an extraordinary memoir. We welcome Marc Garneau to our studio this morning. Welcome.
Great to be with you.
Can we start with this photo of you, first of all? Mr. Garneau, this is a very handsome picture.
That was my second mission in 1996, so I was still young.
Well, this looks great. I also wanted to ask you really quickly about you. We were curious about what you got to keep with you from these historic voyages. Yeah. Please tell Canada what you were allowed to keep.
Well, NASA takes everything back from you after the mission, but they let me keep my comb, the one I took into space.
Like your hair comb?
My hair comb, and I still have it today. It's a stainless steel comb, and I combed my hair with it this morning.
That is remarkable. A piece of history always with you. Listen, your career is head-spinning to list off. Naval officer with the Canadian Armed Forces, first Canadian astronaut into space, first Canadian to serve as Capcom, the voice of mission control, which I thought was very cool, president of the Canadian Space Agency, federal politician. Any one of those jobs for somebody would be a very fulfilling career. What was it like to go back and revisit all those amazing chapters of your life?
You know, I was surprised to realize that I had done as much, because in my life I'd sort of always charged forward. What am I going to do next? But in this particular case, I had to sort of bring it all together.
Yeah.
And I was a bit surprised at how much I had done in the past 40 years.
Were you impressed with yourself?
No, I try not to be impressed with myself, but I did cover quite a bit of ground in some very different professions, and I come away from it retired feeling very satisfied.
Well, your public-facing life is familiar to a lot of people, but what I appreciate about this book is that you go into some very personal parts of your life as well. You had a very mischievous teenage life, as you write about. You also nearly lost an eye in a BB gun mishap when you were a kid. You were arrested and spent the night in jail. Tell us more about this teenage version of Marc Garneau, who went on to do all these incredible and amazing things for this country.
Well, that's why I originally wrote the book. It was for my kids, because they didn't know that much about my early life.
Oh, this is why the dedication. I was curious. As promised is what it says.
Yes, and it was time for me to fess up. And I wanted there to be perhaps a few lessons in there. And I was a bit of a rebellious kid. I was eager to experience life. I didn't have that much good judgment. I made some silly mistakes, but the point about it was that I learned from them. And I was very well supported by my parents and friends, and they helped to keep me on the straight and narrow. And so I wanted to pass that lesson off about my early life.
Really quickly, and this interview is going so fast, but what was it that turned the corner for you? I think a lot of parents would be curious to know. It
was the night I spent in jail. I realized at that point that I was drunk and I was arrested by the police, and you can read about it, but I realized, look, my life is going off the rails here, and I've got to get my act together.
And one of the other portions that people will be curious to read about is that you also experience the loss of life of a loved one to suicide. How did that shape who you are?
That was probably the most difficult part of my life. My wife had bipolar condition and took her own life, and here I was. First of all, the tragedy of losing my wife, but then also had to bring up two 11-year-old twins, and that was a very difficult period in my life.
What was that like to revisit that for the book?
Painful, because those are the kinds of things you're happy to let them fade into the background, but no, I had to be honest about it.
We appreciate that you were. I want to turn now to your career with the Space Agency, and you talk about Canada's need to ramp up our contribution, and you're worried about us missing out. Explain more of that.
Well, other countries are now spending quite a bit of capital on space, and Canada was a leader. We were the third country to actually build a satellite, and so I want Canada, because we're good at it, I want Canada to focus more on space because it's so useful in our daily lives. But I feel that the competition is very, very stiff, and we need to ramp it up because we have the capacity to do it.
I want to ask you about these 14 years you spent as a member of Parliament. You were Minister of Transport, Minister of Foreign Affairs. You write about a call from the Prime Minister to let you know that you would no longer be serving in Cabinet. And you described that as a punch in the gut. While I have you here, I have to ask you, as we are inching ever closer to an upcoming federal election, what are your concerns for the Liberal Party?
Well, the Liberal Party is going through a difficult period at the moment, and so is the leader. There's a certain amount of fatigue. Now, that's fairly normal after 8, 9 years of any government, so it has some challenging moments ahead of it. And the next election, I think, will be very important for the country because there are two very different visions between the Conservatives and the Liberals.
Yeah, is it a party problem or a leadership problem?
Well, I think it's an overall problem. Certainly, the Prime Minister has to deal with the fact that he's unpopular at the moment. But if you ask me, I'm convinced he will run in the next election. And so
if you ask him, he's convinced too. That's what he says.
Indeed.
Listen, Marc Garneau, it's a real pleasure to have you. This memoir has so much in it, and thank you for being so honest. We appreciate it. A reminder to everybody: it's called A Most Extraordinary Ride. Thank you, Marc Garneau, for being here.
Thank you.
If you liked that video, make sure to subscribe to the Your Morning YouTube feed, where you can find all kinds of new content posted every weekday morning.